Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The rain beat against the windows of the Grand Avenue, transforming the city into a maze of shimmering reflections. A frail figure ran, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to their face. Their eyes were filled with panic, and their heart-rending voice echoed through the night. "Don't get in the car." Behind her, a black sedan slowly came to a stop. Inside, sitting behind the wheel, was Alexander Whitmore, a billionaire known for his industrial empire and his legendary coldness. He knew nothing about the young woman who had just screamed at the top of her lungs. To him, it was just another minor incident in the city, a small urban scandal, until he heard her voice tremble with desperate determination. She darted forward, stopping the car door just in time, her gaze meeting Alexander's. He saw pure fear in her eyes, but also something deeper, a truth he wasn't ready to face. "What are you talking about?" he asked, initially irritated, thinking it was a dramatic exaggeration. But the young girl shook her head, panting, her hands trembling as if they were trying to hold back a secret capable of changing her life. "If you get in that car, you'll regret it. Forever." A shiver ran through Alexander. The rain was still drumming on the metal, but suddenly, the world seemed to have stopped. He didn't yet know that this single moment would reveal a terrible truth about his own family, about the decisions he had made, and about the imminent danger he had ignored for years. The young girl took a deep breath, ready to reveal everything. And in that tense silence, Alexander understood that her cry wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum. Alexander Whitmore slowly closed the door of his sedan, still shaken by the girl's scream. Rain was falling in curtains, soaking his fine clothes, but he paid no attention. His thoughts were swirling. Who was this girl, and why did she seem to know something dangerous about him? The young girl, trembling but determined, stepped towards him. Her eyes were an intense, almost piercing blue, and her face expressed an urgency that even Alexander could not ignore. "My name is Emily Parker, Mr. Whitmore," she said in a firm voice despite the cold and rain. "How do you know my name?" asked Alexander suspiciously, frowning. Emily slightly averted her gaze, aware of the enormous gulf between them, him, the most powerful man in the city, and her, a simple student who seemed lost in this world of privilege. "I know what will happen if you get in that car. You won't survive what awaits you." Alexander stared at her in disbelief. Dozens of times in his life, he had faced threats, competitors, journalists, business enemies. But never had a stranger managed to unsettle him to this extent. Emily moved forward again, holding out a slightly crumpled envelope. "It's all in there. Read it, and you'll understand." Hesitantly, Alexander took the envelope. His hands were clenched, his business instincts on high alert. He knew that every decision could be fatal, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the real weight of the danger, not just the numbers or the contracts. The rain continued to pound against the car windows, and the city suddenly seemed silent, as if holding its breath. Alexander Whitmore was about to discover a truth that none of his billions could undo, and it had all started with a young girl's scream. Alexander Whitmore returned home, the rain streaming down his shoulders and the envelope clutched to his chest. His penthouse, usually a refuge of luxury and control, felt strangely cold and hostile that evening. He sat down at his mahogany desk, slowly unfolding the yellowed paper Emily had given him. Inside were official documents, old photographs, and hastily scribbled letters. His heart sank as he recognized a face, that of a man he had thought dead for 20 years, his younger brother, Nathaniel Whitmore. The documents revealed family secrets Alexander could never have imagined. Nathaniel had disappeared after a violent argument with their father, and the entire Whitmore fortune had been built on lies, debts, and fraudulent contracts Alexander had never been informed about. But that wasn't all. One of the letters contained a warning. "Alexander, if you continue to ignore what's happening around you, you'll lose everything, and it could cost you your life." Alexander felt a shiver run down his spine. Emily, the girl in the rain, hadn't screamed for nothing. She knew something he himself had ignored. He looked at the photos again, Nathaniel with an unknown man, in a dark part of town, surrounded by cars and menacing faces. He then understood that this simple warning was not just a cry in the street, it was a signal. A signal that his life, as he knew it, was about to change drastically. Emily. He murmured, talking to himself. Who sent you? And why? But the answers weren't in those documents. They were outside, in the rain, in the city streets. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt he was no longer in control of his life. What Emily had revealed to him that night would force him to confront not only invisible enemies, but also truths about himself that he never wanted to know. The next morning, Alexander Whitmore barely slept. Images of Nathaniel and the threatening letters replayed endlessly in his mind. Every sound in his penthouse seemed to amplify his anxiety. Emily had never given out her number or full address, but he knew he had to find her. He stepped out into the streets, still damp from the previous day's rain. Each step seemed to take him further from his world of luxury and closer to a truth he would have preferred to ignore. His search eventually led him to a small, unassuming neighborhood cafe where Emily had worked intermittently. She was there, sitting at a table, her eyes fixed on a notebook. "Emily," said Alexander, his voice softer than he would have imagined. She looked up, surprised but resolute. "I knew you would come," she said calmly. "You must understand, Mr. Whitmore, you are in danger, but it's not just you." Alexander sat down, trying to hide his impatience and fear. "Explain everything to me." Emily took a deep breath. "Your brother Nathaniel has discovered a secret about your family, and some people want to make sure he never reveals it. That car you were supposed to get into yesterday, it was a trap." Alexander felt his heart clench. The trap, the imminent danger, he had brushed with death without even knowing it. "Why me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Because you are the key. They know you control the Whitmore empire. And if you do nothing, everything you love, everything you've built, could disappear." Silence fell upon them. The other customers in the cafe seemed invisible, as if the whole world had withdrawn to leave them alone with this terrible truth. "So what do we do?" asked Alexander, realizing that for the first time, he was dependent on someone else to survive. Emily gave a small smile, but her eyes remained serious. "We're going to find out who's pulling the strings, and Nathaniel, if we want to save him, we have to act fast." Alexander understood that this encounter was not just a coincidence. Emily was not just a messenger, she was his only chance to understand the truth and survive the shadow that had hung over his family for years. After their meeting at the cafe, Alexander and Emily decided to meet somewhere more discreet to think things over and devise a plan. Alexander rented a small office in a building not far from his penthouse, a place where no one would think to look for him. Emily took a small folder filled with documents, photos, and notes out of her bag. "I started investigating as soon as I learned what your brother had discovered," she explained. "There are strange financial transactions, shell companies, and men, a lot of dangerous men." Alexander quickly scanned the documents. Numbers, names, and places flashed before his eyes, but something immediately caught his attention, a name that appeared repeatedly in several bank files. "Victor Langston," he murmured. "Why does that name keep coming up?" Emily shook her head. "Langston is an influential man behind the scenes. No one sees him, but he controls many things, including information about your family. He probably orchestrated Nathaniel's disappearance." Alexander felt his heart sink. Each piece of the puzzle Emily presented to him made the situation more worrying. "And these photos," he continued, pointing to images showing Nathaniel surrounded by unknown men in dark parts of the city. "This isn't just a disappearance. He's in danger, and we have to find him before it's too late." Emily nodded her head, determined. "Exactly. But we must proceed with caution. These people will stop at nothing. The slightest mistake could cost us our lives." Alexander took a deep breath. For the first time, he felt real fear, but also a newfound motivation. His wealth, his power, and his ego had never been enough to prepare him for this. Now, He depended on Emily's determination and courage to uncover the truth and save her brother. "Very well," he said finally, his gaze fixed and resolute. "Where do we begin?" Emily opened her notebook and pointed to a specific part of the city, known for its abandoned warehouses and dark alleyways. "Here. Nathaniel was last seen in this area. If we want answers, this is where we need to go." Alexander nodded. The previous day's rain, Emily's scream, and the discovery of the truth were only the beginning. The hunt had just started, and every moment would count in saving his brother and uncovering the extent of the danger looming over his family. Night had fallen on the city, shrouding the streets in near-total darkness. Alexander and Emily advanced cautiously through the warehouse district, their footsteps echoing on the damp ground. Each alley seemed more menacing than the last, and the wind rattled rusted metal sheets like a warning. Emily held a flashlight, illuminating the path ahead of them. "According to my information, Nathaniel was last seen here," she whispered. "We need to keep this quiet." Alexander nodded. His businessman's instinct told him to remain calm, but his heart was pounding. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound was amplified in the silence of the night. They finally reached the indicated warehouse. The large metal door was ajar, creaking ominously. Alexander gestured to Emily, and they entered, their hearts heavy. Inside, the air was thick and the smell of damp and rusty metal was almost suffocating. Emily stopped abruptly, pointing to a series of tracks on the ground. "Look," she said. "These are recent footprints. Nathaniel came this way, and not alone." Alexander knelt down to examine the footprints. They were large, robust, and the last one stopped abruptly near an old container. He felt a shiver of alert run down his spine. "Someone has taken it," he murmured through gritted teeth. "And we must find it before it's too late." Suddenly, a metallic clang rang out behind them. Alexander and Emily turned sharply, but there was no one there. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. "They're watching us," Emily whispered. "Or they know we're here," added Alexander, the tension rising a notch. They cautiously approached the container, preparing their minds for anything that might arise. And when they opened the door, they discovered clues that would shatter everything Alexander thought he knew about his brother, his family, and the forces trying to destroy them. Inside, scattered papers, photos of secret documents, and a hastily scribbled message. "If you want to save him, stop searching for the truth alone. Trust no one except the one who warned you." Alexander felt his heart clench. The truth was more dangerous than he had imagined, and every step they took brought them closer to danger, but also to Nathaniel. Alexander and Emily rushed out of the warehouse, their hearts pounding. The rain had started again, cold and driving, as if to underscore the danger that followed them. The clues they had found inside confirmed their worst fears. Nathaniel hadn't just disappeared, he had been kidnapped by an organized group determined to silence him. As they walked away, the sound of an engine echoed down the alley. A black car sped up, blocking their path. Alexander immediately recognized the signature of a private security vehicle, but the lack of any emblem made it unsettling. Emily grabbed his arm. "They've spotted us." Two men in suits got out of the car, their gaze hard and cold. One of them pointed a pistol. "Put back everything you found and no one will get hurt," he said in an icy voice. Alexander felt the adrenaline rising. He had always thought that his wealth and influence protected him, but faced with these armed men, he understood that everything he possessed was worthless without strategy and composure. "Emily, back off," he shouted. But Emily didn't move. She took a determined step forward and raised her hands. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said firmly. "If you lay a finger on my friend, you'll regret it." One of the men sneered, but before he could react, Alexander pulled out his phone and activated his company's security system, triggering a loud alarm throughout the area. The men panicked for a few seconds, long enough for Alexander and Emily to slip behind a dumpster and hide. "We have to hurry," Emily whispered. "Every minute counts, they know we've found something." Alexander nodded, realizing that this mission was no longer just about saving Nathaniel, it had become a fight for their survival. The conspiracy was larger and more dangerous than he had imagined, and every step brought them closer to an invisible but omnipresent enemy. As they resumed their race through the dark alleyways, Alexander wondered for the first time if his wealth and power would be enough to protect him, or if he should finally learn to trust someone other than himself. After their hasty escape, Alexander and Emily found refuge in an old, abandoned building, far from prying eyes and cameras. Breathless, they settled down to analyze the clues they had recovered from the warehouse. Emily spread the documents out on an old, dusty table. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of encrypted files. "These accounts, these transfers, someone has been manipulating everything for years. And look at this name that keeps coming up, Victor Langston. He doesn't just control your empire, Alexander, he's pulling the strings behind all this chaos." Alexander frowned. He had heard of Langston as a discreet and powerful investor, but he never imagined he would be at the heart of a conspiracy against his own family. "And Nathaniel," he murmured, his heart heavy. "He discovered something Langston wanted to keep secret." Emily Boye-Lattette. "Exactly. And if we want to save him, we must understand what he has discovered before it's too late." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Alexander and Emily froze. A figure appeared in the shadows, moving silently. "We are not alone," whispered Emily. Before they could react, the building's door slammed shut and several armed men burst in, surrounding the room. Their leader, a tall, imposing man with a cruel smile, stepped forward. "Whitmore. Parker. I suppose you found something you should never have touched." Alexander felt his heart race. He had faced financial crises and media scandals, but never such direct danger. Emily instinctively stepped in front of him. "Don't touch him," she shouted. The man sneered. "Too late for that. Nathaniel knows too much, and now, so do you." But Alexander, driven by adrenaline and fear for his brother, pulled out his phone and activated a backup geolocation feature, sending a coded signal to his trusted agents. A few minutes later, distant sirens wailed. Langston's men, taken aback, hesitated. This opening allowed Alexander and Emily to slip into a side passage, an old service staircase forgotten for years. Trembling but alive, they went out into the night, aware that every movement they made brought them closer to Nathaniel, but also to the shadow of Victor Langston, an enemy more cunning and dangerous than they had ever imagined. Alexander then realized that this investigation was no longer just a race against time, it was a deadly game where every mistake could be fatal. And for the first time, he understood that he could only rely on Emily, and on himself, like never before. The streets were silent, but Alexander and Emily knew danger was everywhere. Every car, every shadow could be hiding Langston's men. Yet they couldn't back down. Nathaniel was in danger, and every minute counted. Emily took out a small notebook that she had kept on her since the beginning of the investigation. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of notes and coordinates she had compiled from the recovered documents. "These numbers correspond to a warehouse outside the city. According to my calculations, that's where they're holding Nathaniel." Alexander felt a mixture of relief and concern. This was their first concrete lead since the beginning. "Then this is our chance. We have to go, now." They climbed into Alexander's sedan, trying to remain inconspicuous. The rain was still beating against the windshield, adding further tension to their escape. Every horn, every movement in the rearview mirrors made them fear an ambush. Having arrived at the warehouse indicated by Emily, they stopped a few hundred meters away. The place was immense, surrounded by electric fences and surveillance cameras. "This is it," Emily murmured. "There aren't many options. We need to be quick and precise." Alexander nodded. For the first time, he felt truly vulnerable. Not like a billionaire behind desks and contracts, but like a brother willing to do anything to save his brother. They moved forward silently, avoiding cameras and lights. Emily pointed to a service hatch at the rear of the building. "This way," she whispered. "It's the only access we have." Alexander took a deep breath and followed her inside. Darkness enveloped them, but they were resolute. Every step brought them closer to Nathaniel, and every moment increased the risk of falling into a trap. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through the warehouse. "Alexander. Emily, you've finally arrived." It was Nathaniel. But his voice carried a disturbing tension. He was alive, but what he had experienced since his disappearance would change their perception of the entire conspiracy. Alexander and Emily cautiously advanced into the dark warehouse, their eyes accustomed to the darkness. Nathaniel's voice echoed closer and closer, mingling with the metallic sounds of chains and footsteps. Finally, they found him, tied to a chair, visibly exhausted but alive. His eyes lit up when he saw Alexander. "Alex, you came," he murmured. But before they could rejoice, armed men emerged from the shadows, surrounding the trio. Langston's imposing man stood in the center, a cruel smile on his face. "You really thought you could walk in here without any consequences," he said, his voice icy. Alexander felt the adrenaline surge. His years of power and strategy had never prepared him for this moment of immediate danger. But Emily, by his side, gave him the necessary courage. "Let him go," she shouted. The men laughed, but Alexander had anticipated this moment. With a swift gesture, he activated a distress signal from his smartwatch, sending a coded message to his security detail and the local police. Seconds later, sirens wailed in the distance, scattering Langston's men with confusion. Taking advantage of the chaos, Alexander and Emily rushed towards Nathaniel. Alexander quickly freed himself from the ropes that held him, while Emily kept watch to avoid any surprise attack. "Quick, this way," shouted Emily, pointing to an emergency exit. The trio rushed into the passage, Langston's men trying to catch them, but the police and Alexander's security agents arrived just in time to neutralize the attackers. The warehouse, previously a place of imminent danger, became a scene of controlled chaos, thanks to their swift plan and coordination with the outside world. Once safe, Nathaniel, exhausted but relieved, placed his hands on his brother's shoulders. "Thank you. I don't know how you did it," he said. Alexander, still breathless, looked at Emily with gratitude. "Without you, none of this would have been possible. You saved us both." Emily gave a small smile, but her expression remained serious. "It's not over yet. Victor Langston isn't going to give up that easily." Alexander felt the tension return. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since the start of this investigation, they had found Nathaniel and survived a direct confrontation. Their plan now needed to expand to counter Langston and reveal the full extent of his conspiracy to the world. After their escape from the warehouse, Alexander, Emily, and Nathaniel took refuge in a safe place. The relative calm was deceptive. Victor Langston wouldn't remain inactive for long. They knew the final confrontation was approaching. Emily laid out all the documents and evidence collected since the beginning. "It's all there," she said. "Illegal transactions, financial manipulations, threats. Langston built his empire on blood and secrets." Alexander took a deep breath. "It's time to put an end to this. Not just for Nathaniel, but for our family and everyone he's deceived." They devised a daring plan, to lure Langston into a supposedly secret meeting, where Alexander would claim to be giving away part of his empire, while simultaneously leaking the evidence to the press and the authorities. When the day arrived, Langston was sure of his superiority. Alexander greeted him with apparent calm. "Victor, glad to see you," he said, with a cold smile. Langston sneered, certain that his plan was foolproof. But before he could react, Emily activated the live broadcast of the evidence: fraudulent accounts, threats against Nathaniel, compromising photos. Everyone could now see the extent of the conspiracy. Langston paled. His empire of secrecy collapsed in seconds. The police and financial authorities, alerted by the broadcast, immediately surrounded the scene. Nathaniel, finally free and safe, placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You were right, Alex. We couldn't do it alone." Alexander smiled, looking at Emily. "Without you, we wouldn't be here." You saved us both. Emily gave a small smile, and for the first time since the beginning of this ordeal, a feeling of victory and relief filled the room. Langston was arrested, and his empire of deceit collapsed. Alexander and Nathaniel were finally able to rebuild their family on honest foundations, while Emily became more than an ally, a loyal and indispensable friend. As the sun rose over the city, Alexander realized that life could change in an instant. But he had learned something precious: wealth and power are no match for truth and courage. And sometimes, it is in the cry of a young girl that one finds the strength to face anything.